All right, I think we can kick it off and let folks trickle in. But good evening, everyone. My name is Kate Huangpu. I'm a government reporter for Spotlight PA, and I'll be your moderator for tonight's event. Thank you all for spending your Tuesday evening with us. For those of you who are new to our programming, Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit newsroom producing investigative and public service journalism about state government and urgent statewide issues. We can't do any of this work without you, our readers and donors who support us in numerous ways, and you can learn more about us on our website, spotlightpa.org. So before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Tonight's event will be recorded and posted on our website tomorrow for those who cannot join tonight. You can join our discussion by submitting questions during the event. You can do so in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Thank you to all who have already submitted questions. We definitely have a lot of them, so we'll try to get through as many as we can. And special thanks to our sponsor tonight, Ballot PA, a project of the Committee of 70. Ballot PA is a coalition of civic, community, and business organizations committed to ensuring independents in Pennsylvania have the right to vote in the primary. You can learn more at ballotpa.org, and we're going to have David Thornburg, the chair of Ballot PA, to say a few words.
Excellent, Kate, and thank you all at Spotlight for your terrific reporting and for pulling this together, and thanks to all folks on the panel. Let me cut to the core. I think opening primary elections to independent voters in Pennsylvania is the voting rights issue of the 21st century. Hard stop. And why is that? In 1937, a mere 88 years ago, for reasons that no longer matter and that no one can remember, the legislature in Pennsylvania forbid independent voters from voting in primary elections. At the time, independent voters were only about 2 or 3% of the total. It was kind of an oddball thing if you were an independent voter. Much has changed since 1937. Today, 1.4 million voters, the fastest growing part of the Pennsylvania electorate, are denied the right to vote in primary elections. Nationwide, almost half of all voters identify as independent voters. 2/3 of young voters identify as independents. Over half of all veterans. And even in Pennsylvania, when they're denied the right to vote in primaries, 16% of all voters are now independents. This change is long, long overdue, and it's so rewarding to see folks like Representative Solomon and Jen Bullock on the call tonight to make the case. I want to end my remarks, and again, my thanks, just reading a short note that I got along with a check to Ballot PA from a man who I'll call Jim from Easton, PA. Got this on Saturday. You can't see it, but the handwriting's a little shaky, what happens when you maybe add a few years. And he said he's an independent voter, and he said simply this: "Enclosed, you'll find my contribution to help change this antiquated law. We pay taxes, served our country and community, and deserve to vote. We are U.S. citizens. Thank you, Jim." I couldn't say it any better. So over to you, Kate, and thanks again for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thanks again to Ballot PA. We do just want to remind that while we value our sponsors and their support of our journalism, they don't have a role in our event selection, our content, our planning. But to get to the main event, tonight we're going to be discussing open primaries. As an introduction, Pennsylvania is just one of 10 states with closed primaries, meaning that only voters registered as Democrats or Republicans can participate in selecting candidates during the primary election. This has been a longstanding conversation between state lawmakers, voters, advocates, county election officials, but the bill has never made it into law. So to help us shed light on this issue, tonight we're joined by Jennifer Bullock of Independent Pennsylvanians, Sean Drasher, the election director of Lebanon County, and Representative Jared Solomon of Philadelphia. And they're going to tell us a little bit about their work and their themselves. So Jennifer, if we could start with you quickly.
Great. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me on to this discussion. And it's so heartening to have so many people come out when there's so many things we could be doing on a Tuesday night. It's such an incredibly important voting rights discussion, as you so well articulated, David. So I'm Jennifer Bullock. I live in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. I'm a lifelong Pennsylvanian, and my parents instilled in me the requirement to be a part of community and to be an activist and to live your values. So for over 20 years, our group has been fighting for open primaries. I'm coordinator of Independent Pennsylvanians. We are a diverse group of independent and independent-minded voters. We are ordinary citizens advocating for full voting rights of the over 1.4 million independents in Pennsylvania, as David mentioned. And we also have a mission to create a new political culture other than what we have. And we all know what we have is getting worse and not effective and quite dangerous with the hyper-partisanship, divisiveness, and the lack of trust in our government. So we are committed to opening the primaries because us as independents, we pay for the primary and still can't participate. But there's hope, and hopefully we'll get into that in the discussion today. But also, I think it's equally important that we learn how to talk to one another in new ways. That's not all about the old, tired debating who's gonna drown out who. So that's part of our mission as well, which I did want to underline. So again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Sean, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sean Drasher. I'm currently the election director for Lebanon County, PA. Been in elections about 10 years and director here for about 4.
Great, thank you. And Representative, do you mind going ahead and introducing yourself?
Hi, Jared Solomon, State Representative in Northeast Philadelphia. It's great to be here, Kate, with you and Jennifer and Sean and David. This is such an important discussion, Kate, because right now 1.4 million Pennsylvanians are paying their taxpayer dollars. They're paying to prop up the whole election system that we see on election day that Sean administers, that whole operation, and they can't vote. They have no voice, no vote in our system. In parts of Northeast Philadelphia, sometimes less than 10% of people go out to vote. That's a problem. That's a serious problem. And there may be many reasons. People are working 2 or 3 jobs. They forget it's election day. But whatever is going on, we know the status quo is not acceptable. We must do better here in Pennsylvania. And we need to inject new energy and a dynamic new spirit into the voting system in Pennsylvania with the fastest growing party in PA. Unaffiliated voters, 15% of the electorate. By taking this measure, we send a strong signal to those veterans, those independents, those young people that we want you to participate in our democracy. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Representative. I think we did all kind of touch on this a little bit, but Jennifer, if we could start with you, can you tell me a little bit about why it's important to be able to vote in a primary, people who are impacted, and the folks that are impacted by the closed primary system?
Sure. So and we'll probably all be saying some of this over and over again because they're such critical points to keep talking about. The primary is the first round of public elections. The primary is the election that decides who's going to be on the ballot for all of us to vote on in every November. Independents, as the representative just said, are the fastest growing voting bloc. So if there's going to be any kind of democracy worth its salt, we need to address this fundamental voting rights issue. there will be less polarization, more voter turnout in states that have various versions of open primaries. There's more voter turnout. There's less of the extremes on any side of who ultimately represents all of us. And as the representative just mentioned, we have to find new ways of doing government, new ways of hearing one another, listening to one another, because we are in a real crisis. My first job, even though some people think I do this all the time, which I do, is I'm a relationship therapist. And I've been a relationship therapist for 36 years. And I see firsthand the toxicity and erosion that happens when there's massive distrust and whole segments of people who feel disempowered and like I have no voice. They're just a bunch of corrupt people. Why can I, that kind of thing. So we really think that opening the primaries amongst all the important reforms that are out there is critical and first and foremost, because it's the issue that talks about who can even get into the ballot box to begin with. So that's some of why I care about this issue. We, 20 years ago or longer than that, a group of us who were already nonpartisan wanted to talk to other ordinary voters. And the first survey issue that we asked was, we have a completely closed primary system. What do you think about that? We were blown away. That's crazy. Why can't you vote? I moved here from another state that has, open primaries, and I went to try to vote and I couldn't. This is insane. So much so that we said we're going to start advocating seriously in Harrisburg for a bill that would open the primaries. And we've been here ever since.
That sort of leads nicely to my next question. Representative Sullivan, you've introduced the open primary bill many a time now. I was wondering if you could walk us through what your bill would do. Does it allow unaffiliated third parties? Just if you could break that down a little bit.
Kate, I appreciate that. Thanks for reminding me how many times I've introduced it. But this is a fresh start. I think people are looking, yearning, thirsting for government to work, and by rejiggering, reconfiguring our primary system, we get new ideas, fresh ideas on the issues of the day. How to best develop business, fight crime, improve education and healthcare. It can't be that Democrats and Republicans are the only ones that have ideas on how to do that here in Pennsylvania. So my bill is actually pretty narrowly tailored. My bill would allow the 1.4 million voters who are either registered as unaffiliated, that's these checkbox on our, whether you vote, you register online or you do it longhand. So those who have checked unaffiliated, or someone that checks none or other and writes in independent. So that's a total of 1.4 million people. Now, administering this, the way to do this is so simple. Joe comes in on election day and the judge of elections says, I've noticed in the poll book that you're registered independent, unaffiliated. Fantastic. Are you going to take a Republican or Democratic ballot? Okay. He says, I'm going to take a Republican ballot. So we've protected the integrity of the decision of that voter. Joe gets to vote on the Republican ballot. He remains an unaffiliated voter. Joe signs off on a certification, so there's a paper trail to ensure that we know that Joe in this past election decided to vote in the Republican primary. But it becomes a jump ball because both parties can compete for independent votes. And hopefully, as I'm a Democrat, convince people that the ideas of my party should be ones that those independent voters should incorporate into their policy, political philosophy.
Right. And Sean, could you talk a little bit more about what this looks like on the ground, these administrative changes? Because I know that in committee hearings before, election directors have said, you know, we'll need some time to implement this change.
Oh,
So
Lord, yes.
what does that look like?
So from an ops side, like I have no political slant on this conversation in any way, just from a pure ops side. This opens up some interesting questions. There are statutes that are sitting out there that any kind of open primary would be in direct violation of. So we can always clean up those statutes. But some of them even carry criminal penalties for voters potentially crossing party lines, things like that. So I can think of 3 right off the top of my head. I'm sure lawyers paid more than I'm paid could find even more. It's one of the things I've learned since taking over here is that anything we try to do in election law breaks 5 other things. But hey, that's kind of the fun of the job coming in every day. So from the ops side, how we're going to do it. The representative did a good job of explaining with his bill how that setup would be versus, say, a partially closed primary where maybe just Republicans or just Democrats would allow whoever to vote, or a partially open primary. Let's say there's all sorts of ways that we could set this up. The representative's bill does address that directly. So that takes some of the questions off the table. We could always go back and we can look at the other laws, all statutes on the books to see what we need to narrow down there. 3534 elector voting for the wrong party or primary is a big one. That's a $5,000 fine. So there's stuff we gotta clean up. And that's not at the county level though. So at the county level, a concern that we would have at the county level is if unaffiliated voters are given the ability to do this, that gives them more rights as a voter than a party registered voter. Because then, say, a Republican could not come in and vote on the Democratic ticket, and Democrat could not vote on the Republican ticket, but an unaffiliated voter could vote for any of them. And what would we do then with the minor parties? I guess we should not supposed to call them minor parties. Forgive me, folks. But the Greens, the Libertarians, we have a Jedi party. And I think that we have 1 guy or 2 guys in our county that are registered Jedi. So do they get then to register? Do they have to flip to unaffiliated to be able to vote? Or do only the unaffiliated get that extra right to vote for whoever they want? That would be a very interesting question. And any of these little questions, these little things that happen on the ground or election day turn into big fights in the polling places. People have very strong feelings on this stuff. So that's the kind of stuff I'd want to see ironed out ahead of time.
Right. And I should mention, since I've done some reporting on this, our election code is very old. It is quite easy to break at times, as seen by our mail voting laws. So that's something that comes sort of hand in hand with election reform. But Sean, really quickly, could you, from your estimation, like how long would these sorts of changes, how long would you need to prepare to like properly implement this kind of policy?
I would hope that something like this would be a 1-year out process. Anything you're hitting with the elections, you want a full year to get them rolled out and to look at all the potential things that might have broken along the way. But I feel like I gotta point out, so while David, I believe the first speaker, was talking, I changed my voter registration twice while I was sitting here online using the state system. It took me about 40 seconds to do. So anyone that's listening that right now is independent and wants to vote in this primary, well, up until this previous Monday when registration was closed, all you have to do is go online to vote.pa.gov, and anyone in about 40 seconds, well, I know what I'm doing. So let's say 2 minutes if you don't know what you're doing, can change their registration to register for whatever ballot they want to get in the primary. It's not that hard to do.
Right.
But can I jump in, Kate?
Yeah, go ahead.
But you're assuming that, Sean, that the world is defined by only Republicans and Democrats, and no one else should be able to participate in a meaningful way. I want to also address the logistical issues because, yeah, sure, a year to implement, but what's going on in every other state? Do the other 40 states have some kind of pixie dust that they can do this and Pennsylvania can't? I mean, with our innovative spirit, our discovery spirit, how we have helped transform the whole country, we cannot allow independents to vote? It can't be that we can't implement this. You, Sean, were on the ground when we implemented Act 77 in 1999. That was a Herculean effort where you and the amazing people on the ground in 67 counties were able to do that and did it masterfully. You mean we can't do this one additional provision? Of course we can, and we owe it to people who have been shut out of our system.
That year, the post Act 77, we had such a brain drain in elections that it was almost complete turnover at the county level across the entire state. It was over 1,000 years of institutional knowledge were lost in 24 months from the crushing workload that it created. It just all across the whole state, it was devastating to our industry.
Sure, and still the people on the ground, Sean, did admirable work, and we've, I think, moved on as a Commonwealth. And this is not Act 77. This is one change, one small change, which could be easily administered. Also, if you look at the scope of this, in every election district, you're probably talking about somewhere between 2,500 to 5,000 voters. Certain counties like Lehigh County, Monroe County, far outpacing the rest of the state in the number of unaffiliated voters. But think about it. Think about the number of people who vote on primary day. We hope to boost that up, but let's say 10, 15% of those voters, maybe you're looking at 500 voters that are coming in to vote in addition to your typical voters coming out on election day. I really think that our great folks on the ground can absorb that, process that, and make it continue, I should say, to make our elections efficient and effective.
And just for this conversation along, I would like to add that, the measure is broadly popular. According to polling, I think 74% of folks do support this measure. And it's passed in both chambers at different periods. Representative Solomon, could you talk a little bit about what the hurdles are that still remain, right? Like this is broadly popular. This has passed both chambers at various times. What's still in the way here?
I think it's difficult in some ways because there are 253 members of the legislature, House, and Senate. Because of that, all of us have run and won an election at some time in our lives. And because of that, we are all sort of mini election legislation, election policy experts, because we believe that we understand our districts, and by extension, we know how elections should be run. The expansion of the system is seen as a threat to the political establishment on both sides of the aisle. Much to the contrary, though, it should be seen as a big win because now we get to sell our brand to a whole new group of voters. And by the way, 90% of elections in Pennsylvania, state legislative elections, are determined in our primary. So if we engage these primary voters, these independent voters, they're now going to be voters in the general. And I think now they're going to be active members of civil society because they're going to feel welcome into the process.
Jennifer, could you speak a little bit about the impact of not having open primaries specifically on this election, the one that's in, 2 weeks? Who's not able to participate, and what are sort of the costs of that?
Well, who's not able to participate is us independents, even though it's a public and publicly funded election. So what we're passionate about, and I understand the probably in some ways nightmarish process of changing on the ground when you're an election official, Sean, what you're talking about, how do we do this? How do we make sure that the process is secure and that people are doing what they need to be doing? But inconveniences of changing how things are done on the ground is outweighed by everyone being able to participate in all elections. That is critical and fundamental, not to be insensitive to how do we implement this? But it has to be done if we are going to have a shot at changing the culture of how we do politics. Is there any other reform that would have as big of an impact on voter turnout? We need, and independents play a critical role in this, to be in a way, sometimes the way I talk about it is that we're the anti-inflammatory treatment to a divisive hyperpartisan disease. And we're still treated as second-class citizens. And we are forced to join a party, even if it's for a few days or a couple weeks, which we should never, ever be forced to do. So and I understand, Sean, when you say it's so easy, just change to whatever one you want to, and then change back. If we're talking about what's easy for the process, that's not what we're addressing. And that's not what so many independents we talk about and talk to are concerned about. I will never change my registration to DRR, not ever. And there's no independent in Pennsylvania that should ever be told that's what you have to do to have your franchise. So on May 20th, when we, like we do every year, go out, you see in my background with our signs, I can't vote today, ask me why. It's the funnest and easiest informational picket. That's why we do it every year. Everyone. Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. Why can't you? I'll support that. Where do I sign? I'll support that. It's the party leaders that make this still not a reality. And party leaders should not have such a say in the overall political and election process.
And I do just want to point out also as well, because this election cycle is particularly local races, it's a lot of candidates that cross-file. So they register both as Democrats and Republicans. That's something that is supposed to be nonpartisan. It's particularly relevant this go around where, again, independents can't participate in the election. I do want to get to audience questions quickly, but I do want to wrap up first with a question for all three of you guys. This is one of a slate of election changes that folks have been asking for quite a while. If y'all could just maybe talk through some of other voting reforms you've seen or heard that could increase voter participation. How would that look in Pennsylvania? What can we learn from other states? Oh, Jennifer, if you want to start with you.
I'm I'm not the great person to start with. I am so extremely biased. I think opening the primaries is the #1 way to increase voter participation. So I'll pass that on to the representative or Sean or others in the audience.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. If it's not clear, I don't really have very strong feelings either way. I know in Arizona they've moved to open primaries and it hasn't affected voter turnout at all. In New Jersey, they've opened primaries. They have lower voter turnout than we do in the primary. I heard Wyoming was a good state to look at as maybe a positive story spin on this. And I tried to get some data before we hopped on the call. I couldn't find anything that showed me either way, unfortunately. So I'm not really sure it'll have any impact on turnout. Something that had always appealed to me in this debate was the idea that maybe that this would be a mellowing effect on the general tone of elections. Maybe this would help kind of bring down the temperature. And I know there's been academic research done on this, and unfortunately, it hasn't been conclusive or hasn't shown that it's been impactful. So that's why I'm just kind of non-committal on this one. To me, it's not a particularly big deal. I know it'll cut. We could, as Representative Solomon mentioned, we can adapt. Oh my gosh, we find ways to do it. We always, whatever the legislature passes, we find a way. We do ask for as much time as possible, but we'll always find a way to do it. There are costs associated with it. Courts will sort out the details of the conflicting statutes. The costs aren't terrible, but we are in a shoestring budget in elections, so that would be just the additional ballots that would be printed and getting out to the counties. Not the end of the world, not that big of a deal there either. So we can adapt. And as always, we in the ops side will do whatever the bidding of the legislature and the courts tell us to do. So
I'm sure that's a real joy. Sean, I put in, I don't know if you've ever looked at or anyone has looked at the report by the Bipartisan Policy Center that shows that there is evidence of an increase in voter participation when we have various versions of open primaries. The thing that is tricky about that is that our position is that we should have the right to vote, period. And then we can see all the impacts. We're still working within this two-party duopoly lens that keeps independence in the blind spot. And we're human beings, and we have a critical role to play in the overall political and election process. And so when you or others say it's no big deal, you can change your legislation, and it doesn't even look at New Jersey, you're actually maybe on purpose or inadvertently saying, we don't exist, we don't matter, it's not a big deal. My voting rights is a critically huge fundamental deal.
I would just add, Kate, in terms of accessibility to the ballot, because that's really where my focus is. Open primaries is key, but I think there's a suite of policies that are critical. We need real early voting. We have early voting now at satellite locations, but we need early voting on machines a few weeks before Election Day, including weekends to accommodate for people's schedules. We also need same-day voter registration. People are busy. People forget. Deadlines are missed. So if you want to vote on Election Day, you should be able to do that, go to the polls, register, and then vote. I think those three policy initiatives, if we could get those to the governor's desk, will, without question, increase voter turnout in PA.
Thank you. And I will just say, to Sean's point, I think there have been a lot of changes that election directors have been asking in terms of practical administration, right? Pre-canvassing for the longest time. And that's been quite a heavy lift for the state legislature. So I've heard from a lot of election directors that adding more and more can prove a challenge. And that's just something I've been hearing from many election directors.
Yeah.
But to go to audience questions, because we have a lot, so I will try to get through as many as possible. I think Representative Solomon, you might be a good person to ask for this. There have been a lot of questions about how open primaries can throw elections, quote unquote, how they might impact, I think what we've talked about, like jungle voting. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and how your bill addresses that?
Sure. So there were two competing versions. There was mine, and then there was Representative Marla Brown. Representative Brown would have allowed for minor parties to also vote in primaries, Libertarian Party, Socialist Workers Party, Green Party, etc. I don't support that because I think if you have made a clear decision that you want to participate in a party, in a primary, there is a structure to do that. My focus is unleashing the voice of the 1.4 million unaffiliated voters in Pennsylvania. In terms of meddling with the elections, it simply has never happened. I know Sean brought that up as well. It's brought up every time that this bill comes up for a vote. Rush Limbaugh tried that when Hillary Clinton was running for president to encourage people to register in the Democratic Party and throw that election. It's failed each and every time. To do this on a very large, massive scale requires a lot of resources, requires a lot of coordination. And the vast majority of people don't simply view their vote, their voice, as a way to spoil a party's election. They really take their vote seriously and want to engage in a political process, and they believe there is integrity and integrity in their vote and in the election system.
And I just want to add the party rating, a strategic voting, shenanigans argument is one again where it's an argument when people are wearing hyper partisan lenses. Independents are not interested in strategic voting or party rating. We're interested in being able to get to the ballot box to begin with, and we would not risk any kind of shenanigans, which, by the way, that can happen now with, back and forth. So, and you might be getting into this, Kate, in a minute, but a lot of people I know are asking about the terminology. And Representative Solomon's bill, I think, is technically called a semi-open primary process, not a fully open process, which is what you were just asking. It's not anyone can vote for the other party or third parties, not yet. Now, we support getting to a place, a promised land of completely nonpartisan first round, second round, but we're not there yet, but we're going to get there after we pass Representative Solomon's bill and it becomes into law.
Great, thank you. And Sean, a question we've gotten from a few folks is if you could estimate the costs that it would be to print additional ballots, to train poll workers for an open primaries bill.
It's hard to put a number on that because it's based on number of voters in the county or municipality, the type of election. That's all over the map, but it would not be millions of dollars. Our total budget in a medium large county is less than $1 million for everything for the year. So I can't imagine it would add a tremendous amount of cost. It would add a little bit. That could be absorbed. Speaking about the timeline, over a year, our budgets are set a year in advance and they're very tight. So we ask for a long lead time for things like that. I'm sorry, I can't give you a specific number. We'd have to look at a very, very specific case by case basis.
And we in the legislature would have to provide that to Sean and the folks in other counties. Remember, of course, that many counties have electronic voting. They're not printing ballots. So this is it, right? It's pressing the ballot and changing the ballot over to either the Republican ballot or the Democratic ballot. There would be a certification form, but the folks on the ground are used to this. They deal with certification affidavit forms when there are voters who get assistance in the polling place. We're not talking about a big cost here, certainly something that the state could absorb.
Great. Another question we had, well, we had a lot of questions about ranked choice voting and how that might interact with an open primary system. I know Representative Solomon, I believe you introduced that bill last session, the ranked choice voting bill. Could you briefly just summarize what that is and how that could interact with an open primary?
Yeah, ranked choice voting is as simple as 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You rank your preferences. We have preferences in most things in life, and in this case, we have preferences in candidates. Oftentimes, you like a candidate more than another, but you do have a second or third preference. So you would simply go through the process and rank candidates. Let's say it's a 5-way judicial race, since judicial races are coming up, and you would vote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, depending upon your preference for those particular candidates.
Mhm.
And you would still do it, of course, Kate, within the confines of a primary system. So my bill could still apply. We would now be adding a different component of that. But I am focused on open primaries right now and getting that to the governor's desk.
And I so appreciate your advocacy and leadership, because part of what we talk about is ranked choice voting, which is a very popular, transformational in some ways, reform of how we vote. However, if it's not linked with open primaries, it is a reform that still doesn't address fundamental voting rights. And I know I sound like a broken record, but you could have a beautiful ranked choice voting system and still independents are locked out. So it can solve one issue, but not the issue that open primaries addresses, which is why we early on took on this reform as our #1 reform.
Great, thank you. There have been a lot of folks asking if y'all could summarize what the political landscape looks like for open primaries. You know, if the state Democrat and Republican parties support it, what legislative leaders had said. Jennifer, you might be a good person to ask since you've been in this for, you know, many decades now. Could you summarize sort of what legislative leaders and party leaders have said about open primaries?
Well, it's interesting. You know, 20 years ago, when we started talking to legislators, it would be, okay, yeah, I'll put out a bill and maybe I'll get a couple sponsors and it really won't be bipartisan. And that's really what it looked like for years. But we kept on persisting. And then in the 18-19 sessions, 2018-19 sessions, there was a bill that was presented in the Senate and passed by overwhelming bipartisan majority. And that is a huge deal. It didn't go anywhere in the House, but that's a step. And even last year, one of the bills passed the state government committee for a vote on the floor. It didn't happen yet, but we're getting closer and closer. What I'm seeing now is that legislators, like the fabulous, passionate, brilliant leadership of Representative Solomon and Senator Laughlin and Senator Bascala, legislators are more and more won over to this is good for all of us. We get to talk to everyone. It's the party bosses that are still not won over. I don't have any answer as to how to get there, but that's my sense. And that wasn't always the case. And that's why I feel so hopeful and so excited to keep going, because we are making progress. When I talk to folks in other states or even folks new to this in Pennsylvania, they're like, well, come on, this is like, makes sense. Why, we're going to get something passed next year, right? Like, let's be patient as well as impatient. Let's be patient as well as impatient, because it's going to happen.
Great, thank you. And Representative Solomon, there's someone asking if you could sort of summarize where your bill stands, co-sponsors, chances of passing, what does leadership in both houses say, if you have a sort of summary of that?
Think about this, Kate. What's another issue that has folks on the far right, MAGA Trump Republicans, and folks on the very fringe of the Democratic Party all united that this is the right thing to do? I really can't think of many other issues. You mentioned the polling at the outset of this conversation. Name another one where you're talking about 75, 80% broad range of folks throughout the Commonwealth, all over the political spectrum. I think that's why more and more people, including the leaders on both sides, are taking a serious look at this. We've passed it twice. As Jennifer mentioned, we passed it in the Senate, big bipartisan vote. We passed it in the House, bipartisan vote. Now we have to put the two together to make sure we get this into law. I think there's also a look, Kate, at this because of the number of people that are leaving the two major parties. In 2024 alone, 76,000 people left the Democratic and Republican parties. We're now almost, I know we're 15% of the electorate in PA, we're almost actually at 16% of the electorate PA and growing fast. Party leaders are seeing that and saying, and Jen alluded to this, we want to talk to these voters. We want to engage them because these could be voters that could fuel some of the new energy that we want in our party.
Yeah, and one audience member asked before the event, how many independents do you think there really are in PA? I think we've mentioned that this is one of the fastest growing demographics in terms of political affiliation. Jennifer, maybe if you could speak to the growth of this this affiliation and any demographics within that.
Well, you know, it's interesting thinking about preparing for today and thinking about, you know, going back, you know, used to be, we would say on our signs, you know, 800,000 people are independent. And then a few years later, 900,000 people are independent in Pennsylvania. 2015, 1.1, we have to keep changing our signs. 1.1 million voters are independent. Now it's 1.4 million voters are independent. So it's that keeps growing, whereas the registration, I think you just said this, Representative, in the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania has flattened some, has gone up some in the Republican Party, but the independent vote keeps going up, which is important, especially if we think about people know I'm limited in my voting rights and I'm still going to check off unaffiliated. And Pennsylvania reflects the national trends. I think David said it at the opening, or some said it today in our discussion, that anywhere between 40 and 46, 47% of voters nationally consider themselves outside of that two-party framework.
Great, thank you. We have another audience question about research linking hyperpartisanship to closed primaries. I think, Sean, you had mentioned that there's not one definitive, conclusive study, but could you speak a little bit more about what kind of research you've seen, and maybe, Jennifer, you could speak to what the theory of the case is, like what the argument is about hyperpartisanship and opening primaries?
Well, when I don't know what to say beyond, I haven't been able to find any research that demonstrates it at all. It seems like, just from a pure logic, well, that sounds like a reasonable thing to assume, right? So I was hoping I could find something that showed me something that that wasn't from an activist group or something. It just showed, yeah, here's what we found, and I just don't see it anywhere. That would be great if that worked out that way. Beyond that, I don't know how to say. I haven't to say what I've seen, what I haven't seen.
So are you saying, Sean, that you don't see that closed primaries feed hyperpartisanship? Is that what you're referring to?
I don't see opening them makes any difference.
So
Anyway.
your sense is that if people running for office need to talk to all voters, if Representative Solomon in his next run needs to, and it's an open primary, I want to talk to independents and I want to talk to fellow Democrats. That doesn't decrease the inflammation of partisanship. That's what I'm literally wondering how, because I guess maybe because I am an activist, but it's kind of shocking to me. And maybe you're onto something for us to look at, but I don't know how allowing independents to be a part of all elections would not address partisanship. If I'm running for office, I only need to talk to my small base.
Well, you're assuming that independents aren't hyperpartisan. So that's assuming that independents aren't hyperpartisan as well. I mean, just because someone registers independent doesn't mean they don't have extremely strong opinions on politics, right? Whether it's open primaries or anything else on the political agenda, the independent people are just as capable of having really strong political stands. In fact, I'd say engaged independents might have stronger, very strong political stands. Don't get me going on the Greens and the Libertarians. They are very, very strong stands, and that's awesome. But just because they're not a registered Democrat or Republican doesn't mean it doesn't mean that they are just a soft middle either. It just means they're either rejecting the parties outright or just choosing not to. I just don't see that. I, by the way, was with you for a while. I thought, well, this does sound like it would kind of mellow things out. I just haven't seen it.
Of course it does. So if my district, let's take my district, it's about 82% Democratic district. Right now, the only people I talk to win re-election are Democrats. For the most part, people who believe what I believe in terms of social policy, fiscal policy, the just general philosophic worldview were aligned. Now I'm injecting 2,500 to 5,000 folks into that primary system where turnout is already low. Every politician who cares about re-election is going to recalibrate their approach because now they need to flex muscles they have never flexed before. And talk to those 2,500 to 5,000 people, whether they want to or not. And every single elected official will want to because they want to gain their support. So they're going to talk about the issues instead of just rank base plays. They're going to try to broaden the sweep of their policy goals to try and bring in new voices into the system that can only be positive for our political system.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I really appreciate, Sean, you pointing to that independents can be very passionate. We're not just like this neutral middle. And of course we are, but that's the very reason that we want to be included, because we have strong opinions and we want to vote for the candidate, not the party, which is what decreases the hyperpartisanship.
Great. Thank you both. Well, thank you all. I'm trying to see how much time we have left to fit in as many questions. I think we can squeeze in two more. One of the questions we've been seeing a lot is about the inclusion of non-major parties to be on the ballot. With open primaries, by not including non-major parties on the ballot, how would that promote two-party rule? That's sort of the summary of it. How does that impact the dynamic with the major parties sort of dominating the space? Yeah, Jennifer or Representative Solomon, if you guys could touch on that.
Well, is the question or set of questions, how do we feel about the inclusion or exclusion of formed third parties like libertarians, the Greens?
Yes, exactly. So by not including third parties within the open primary system, would that allow the two major parties to sort of maintain their grip, their hold on the current political system?
I would just say quickly that in general and unaffiliated, this ability to bring in unaffiliated independent voices is critical because of the way that we frame out our political choices and the way that we view third parties, whether it's minor parties, whether it's unaffiliated voters. And just a way to look at this, we have under election code major parties. It's determined by the vote share in elections, presidential elections, Democratic, Republican. Under that, we have the minor parties, Green, Libertarian, etc. The way that our Department of State gathers data is by then categorizing everyone else as other.
Yeah.
As other. We literally basically say your voice is other because you have decided not to make a choice that we as a Commonwealth value. That is really problematic. So we don't just advocate for this because we need to bring in unaffiliated voters. We advocate for this because this will change the political culture in our Commonwealth. And this really is what we're about, right? Yeah. We are about, from William Penn on, engaging diverse opinions and having each of those opinions have a stake in our democracy.
Great. And I just want to squeeze in one more really quickly, because a few folks have asked this. I think this might be best for Jennifer. They're asking, what can they do to help bring open primaries in PA? How to volunteer or get involved in your organization? Do you have any contact information? Just shoot out.
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, please join us for our very fun informational picket that's going to be in Center City, Philly this year on May 20th. You can contact me through the website that I think you posted, our website, PA Independence. You can also check out, of course, Ballot PA on how to get involved. And there's also national organization Open Primaries that you can check out. But certainly my contact information is on the website. We have monthly meetings that are friendly discussions. What's happening in Pennsylvania? How can we get involved? How can we support moving this process along? Because we're going to get there.
Great. All right. Thank you three so much for participating. I really appreciate it. I just want to remind folks that the primary is coming up. Mail ballots are due by May 13th, or you have to request them by May 13th. May 20th is the primary. You can find more information on our election page, spotlightpa.org/elections. And thanks again to our sponsor for tonight, Ballot PA. If you want to find more info about our events, that's spotlightpa.org/topics/events. And any questions or comments can be directed to our events coordinator, Yasmin. Her email is ypiper@spotlightpa.org. Thank you all so much for participating. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for attending tonight.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Night.